The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
The king of pop is a monster masquerading as a man-child. At least that's how he's summed up by the prosecution. Michael Jackson is a naive innocent, not dangerous, but simply duped by a family of con artists. That's according to the final words of the defense. Now, which version will these jurors buy? Hello, I'm James Curtis, and welcome to E's coverage of the Michael Jackson trial. The last day of closing arguments turned out to be quite the family affair. Michael Jackson entered the Santa Maria courthouse along with his famous sisters, Janet and LaToya, his parents, and his brothers, Randy, Tito, and Jermaine. Inside the courtroom, defense attorney Tom Mesereau got one last chance to make his case before the jury. Here's how the jurors heard it according to the courtroom transcripts.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, I summed up for you a history of con artists, actors, and liars in the family. I talked about welfare fraud. I talked about perjury. I talked about the J.C. Penney case. I talked about fake disability claims, fake food stamp claims, fake unemployment claims, signing documents under penalty of perjury that are false. I talked about fake bank accounts. I talked about Janet putting her children on stage to do plays about their poverty. I talked about Gavin being an actor. Chris Tucker telling you that he was cunning and smart, that he didn't trust him, that he warned Michael Jackson, stay away. Something is wrong with these people, and unfortunately, Michael didn't listen.
Next, are the young accusers' charges really about revenge and greed?
And as I said yesterday, they put demeanor in issue. The only time you ever saw him get angry was when we talked about what Michael really had done for he and his family and what had happened. And his anger came out when he made the false statement that Michael had done nothing for his family. Remember, he started using this scripted phrase, "In my 11-year-old mind, I believed George Lopez had done more because he went to the hospital and bought me clothes. In my 11-year-old mind, I thought others had done more because they were at the hospital. In my 11-year-old mind, Michael Jackson hadn't done much for me at all. And I went through all the things he had done. The visits to Neverland, the plane flights, the hotel, the truck, all the blood drives, you name it. The gifts, the watch, the jacket. I've probably forgotten half of them. Michael did all sorts of things for this family. The problem was they wanted it to continue, and they realized at some point it would not continue. Michael was not going to be their benefactor for the rest of their life, and that's when all the trouble started. And I said yesterday, if you convict him of anything, they are going to be multi-millionaires through attorneys Feldman and Dickerman. It's all set up. They're just waiting. They're waiting to celebrate, waiting to walk into court, waiting for the biggest con of their careers right here. They just need you to help them. That's all. You have to look at the changing stories. You have to look at the inconsistent statements by Gavin and Starr because they're the only witnesses to this so-called molestation.
One of the things that jumps out about a closing argument, and indeed about an entire case, is what we know to be a theory of the case. The prosecution has their theory of the case. The defense has their theory. This seems to be an effective portion of it. Howard Weitzman, guilty verdict equals cha-ching for these accusers. You don't want to do that.
Well, I think that's one thing. The theory of the case should have been the testimony of the witnesses is not credible. I believe he should have made a greater thing out of Gavin saying he was awake for 2 counts and Starr saying he was asleep for 2 other counts. That defies logic, and I think that's a big hit on the credibility of these 2 young men.
But I do think that it's important when Mr. Mesereau says they just need you to help them, because the fact is these jurors may not like this family, and if they feel like all they have to do is render this verdict and it's going to enrich this family that they don't like, they may not feel comfortable about doing that.
No, I think that's a good theory, but I think that's the secondary theory.
Okay.
I think you have to tell this juror, look, he didn't commit these crimes based on this evidence, and there's no doubt there's been some question raised. Is it reasonable doubt? And I think it's pretty close.
You think it's close?
I said it's an uphill battle, but when you look back at what's taken place here, these kids have not been consistent in their testimony. 5 times, 2 times, awake, asleep. That should be enough to give someone question.
Howard Weitzman says go for the throat, go for the basis of the charges, then bring in all your other ammunition. Now, defense attorney Tom Mesereau pounds home his 3 major themes. Guess what they are? Credibility, credibility, and then there's credibility.
You can't count the number of lies under oath by all of the witnesses. You can't count them. They lie directly, they lie to your face, they lie under oath, they exaggerate, they give runaround answers to try to avoid the question. How many does it take to let you know this case is a fraud? They are trying to take advantage of Michael Jackson. They are trying to profit from Michael Jackson. They think they've pulled it off. They're just waiting for one thing, and that is your verdict.
Next, how many questions does it take about the evidence to add up to reasonable doubt?
If you think somebody may be guilty, it's not enough. If you think perhaps they're guilty, it's not enough. If you suspect they might be guilty, it's not enough. Possibly guilty is not enough. Probably guilty, not enough. Guilty likely, not enough. Guilt highly likely, not enough. It's got to be guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. And ladies and gentlemen, when you get in the jury room, ask yourselves, do we have any reasonable doubts about this family and this case? Any. All it takes is one.
All it takes is one. Double, perhaps triple entendre there, Sean Chapman.
Yes, absolutely. You know, beyond a reasonable doubt, as you well know, is the highest standard in the law.
Yes.
It's a very, very tough burden of proof. And it's very appropriate for him to hammer on this, I think, in this case, because this is the kind of case where the jurors may think, in our gut, we feel like something inappropriate happened here. But that's not the question. The question is, did the prosecution prove it beyond a reasonable doubt with the evidence they had? And I don't think they did.
Look, Michael Jackson is not charged with felony weirdness. And that's the problem here from day one. You know, I remember 12 years ago, it was suggested to Michael, stay away from these young kids, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because it looks like you are, or people can make that inference. And that's the presentation here. You know, he has admitted he invites young people into his bed.
How can this possibly be innocent conduct? Just look at it, folks. Use your common sense is paraphrasing the argument that the prosecution makes.
Except I think you got to get above common sense here to prove somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that really is the question. And as Grandma used to say, maybe common sense just ain't that common. When we return, mistakes in judgment or the acts of a monster. Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. As defense attorney Tom Mesereau continues his closing argument, is Michael Jackson a demon or a victim of deceit? Here's what Tom Mesereau told the jurors according to the courtroom transcripts.
How, with these instructions on the table, in your hands, you've already gotten packets of them, how, if you look at these carefully and look at this evidence, can you convict Michael Jackson of anything? Ladies and gentlemen, you can't. You just can't. The witnesses are preposterous. The perjury is everywhere. The claims are preposterous. None of it works. The only thing they have left is throwing dirt all over the place to see if something sticks. Girly magazines. He's had problems in his personal life. He's been immature and naive, childlike. But remember, their basic claims are that he's akin to a monster, that he would take a cancer-stricken child and look at that person as a target and ply him with alcohol so he can molest him. From what you've seen about Michael Jackson in this trial, does that make sense? If you look deep into your heart, do you think it's even remotely possible that Michael Jackson is constructed that way? Is evil in that particular way? Has no conscience? Has no feeling for children? Has no idealism? Isn't childlike? He's really just, it's all Neverland's a ruse for criminal activity? Does what you've seen in this trial reflect that? Is it even possible? It's not. It really is not.
Don't know about that argument, but now we reach a major moment in this trial. Defense attorney Tom Mesereau, final message to the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a nightmare for Mr. Jackson. He has been lax with his money. He has let the wrong people sometimes associate around him. He was naive to allow the anywhere near him. But under the law and the facts in this courtroom, you must return a verdict of not guilty on all counts. It's the only right verdict. Thank you.
Strong final message, but Howard Weitzman, was it a misstep there when he got into the idea of, do you think Michael Jackson is, I think the words were built this way or constructed that way, is he the face of evil? How can you make that argument in light of what we all know now to be an unknowable face of somebody who's a predator? We don't know what they look like. They could be your neighbor, could be anybody. How could you make that?
I wouldn't have made that type of argument. And there are a couple of things that I think I would have emphasized. You know, you mentioned grandma, and I kind of forgot about that for a moment. But Michael Jackson and the grandmother giving him the same advice. Nobody asked the grandmother that. But that was preposterous. And he does make good points with respect to the credibility of the family.
I think the predator argument was a good one. Because,
really?
Yeah, because if Michael Jackson is a child molester, I don't think it is that he's a predator and that he built Neverland to lure kids to come there. He is someone who has got some sort of stunted sexual and emotional growth. He is very weird, so stipulated. And so perhaps it's just that he is engaging in inappropriate conduct that he's confused about. Now, if he did that, he's guilty and he should be convicted. But the prosecution has staked its claim on that he's this predator and he's this bad guy and he's evil, and I don't think that has been demonstrated.
Well, that may be true, and I will even give you that argument, Sean Chapman Holly. Will the jurors then fill in the gap, say it's neither one extreme nor the other as painted by either side of this case? It is somewhere in the middle, but he still may be good for these charges, at least some of them. Next, prosecutor Ron Zonin gets the final word, but Michael Jackson's sister, Janet, both of them, Janet and LaToya, do not want to stick around to hear it. Here's what upset the Jackson women during Zonin's rebuttal.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This responding argument is going to be in response to the argument delivered by Mr. Mesereau over the last 4 hours of court time, and it will be limited to those issues that he has presented. This man has never had adult companionship to that extent that any of us have heard of at any stage during the testimony in this case. 1 consecutive year. This man went to bed every night with a 12-year-old boy the entire time. As they traveled from one European capital to another, as they traveled from one South American capital to another, as they ventured even into Africa. That is not a friendship. That's a relationship. Mr. Jackson loved that child not as one loves a child, but as one loves a companion, an adult, a sexual relationship. It's the only explanation for that. In your entire lifetime, you have never heard of another middle-aged man doing that with a child. In your entire lifetime, you never will hear of another middle-aged man doing that with a child. You would be outraged if you were to find out that there was somebody who lived in your neighborhood who was taking young boys into his bedroom amidst a sea of pornography and alcohol. You'd be on the phone with the police in a second.
As Prosecutor Ron Zonen continues, was the timing of the alleged molestation of Gavin part of Jackson's plan?
Why would Mr. Jackson do it? Because he could. Because he had this child in his room. Because he had been working with this child for some time. Because this child was in love with him. Because this child would do anything that he wanted him to do. Because this child was already in his bed and already sharing the intimacies of his affection. Because this child already was viewing the pornographic materials that were there. Because this child was already freely drinking. Because Starr had started leaving the room and was no longer there at that particular time. And his opportunity was there, and the child was ripe.
Because, go ahead, guys.
Well, you know, it's that emotional hook that they try to get out of this. You know, it's interesting. Mr. Zonen talks about the boy that was with him for every day for a year, yet no one testified that there was anything inappropriate, molestation that took place during that period. So why is he throwing that in? To get some emotional hook with the jury.
Right. And, you know, Janet and LaToya know that. That's why they walked out. I know, having been a criminal defense lawyer for a long time, it's hard to sit there and listen to that closing argument. It's so hard. You want to get up, you want to say something, and you can't. You've already had your last shot.
But is that going to be seen as so much of a stunt on the part of the Jackson family? They get up and walk out. Obviously, they're the center of attention when they leave the courtroom. Come on.
I think it has an impact on a juror. Whether all 12 are impacted by it, I don't know. But it sure is they're clearly upset and don't believe the allegations, and they're supportive of their brother.
What about this argument, why did he do it? Because he could. That seems to be a little weak to me. If you're going to say anything, why not say, because he's a pedophile, he molests kids, because he could, the access is...
You're right.
Correct. That should have been the approach.
Well, I'm not sure why he said that. That was a little puzzling to me. When we return, the prosecution's last chance to now, better late than never, brand Jackson as a pedophile. Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. To wrap up his argument, Prosecutor Ron Zonen turns once again to what many observers find to be one of the state's strongest pieces of evidence. That is, the 2003 police interview of the young accuser. Here's what happened according to the courtroom transcripts.
You just witnessed the 7 worst minutes of this young man's life. 13 years old, and you saw him disclose for the first time that he had been molested by Michael Jackson. A person that he had been close to, a person that he had loved, a person who had been a very important person in his life. Mr. Mesereau has told you that that child made all that up, and that is all an act. That's a product of having been in an acting class some number of years prior. I'm telling you that your common sense will tell you otherwise. Ladies and gentlemen, my closing argument is concluded. I'm telling you now that as you go back in deliberation, you're going to discover something. You're going to discover, as the 12 of you get together and begin your deliberations, that the collective wisdom that you're going to generate far exceeds the sum of its parts. You're going to find it amazing. When you start talking among yourselves and looking at the evidence, as you'll have to do, the revelations for you, what you'll be able to discover in this case that you had previously not even thought about. And you'll find that it will be quite possible to achieve justice in this case. And you will find as you deliberate that these accusations are not false, that these accusations are entirely accurate, entirely appropriate, and in fact, entirely truthful. And we'll ask you to go back and begin your deliberations in this case and return guilty verdicts as to all counts against Michael Jackson. Thank you.
Now, I have found, as I'm sure you all have, that something amazing does happen when those 12 folks get back in that jury room. They come up with stuff that neither side, or either side, whichever the appropriate term is, have thought of or thought to argue or analyze in the case.
And that's what's so difficult about predicting a verdict in this or any case. It's 12 people from all various backgrounds, ethnicities, differences, common sense views, and they get back there, and you're right, something happens, and you can't predict what that's going to be. I think in L.A. County, this would be an acquittal on all counts, but it's not in L.A. County. It's in Santa Maria, and I don't know what those jurors are like. They're rural. It's who they are and what they bring to this.
And that's a very important thing.
That's true.
L.A. County, New York, suburban or an urban area, different than what many people who don't live in California see this as. Folks who aren't from here see this as L.A. It ain't L.A. It's way, 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 way north.
Very true. And we know they have to look at Michael as weird. The world does. Look, there's no doubt there were sleepovers. There's no doubt there was some girly magazines around. There's no doubt that these boys drank alcohol, whether they took it themselves or Michael Jackson provided it to them. But you know what? It's a little foggy as to whether or not this kid was telling the truth. And that fog, if it rises to the top, I think is going to allow this jury to find a reasonable doubt.
Do you think that this jury, real quick, is going to come back with a verdict as opposed to a hanging? Will they decide unanimously on anything, one way or the other?
I think they'll decide unanimously. It's certainly on the conspiracy.
Okay.
It's got to be a not guilty
Howard?
there.
Well, I happen to agree with Sean. I would not be surprised if they couldn't arrive at a verdict on the molestation counts.
All right, got to leave it right there. But before we sign off, we want to acknowledge all the talented actors who have appeared on our reenactments over the last several months. They did an outstanding job bringing this trial to life. But that's it for the prosecution, that's it for the defense, and that's it for us. Now the opinions of 8 women and 4 men of the jury become the only ones that matter. Not that I don't love these guys. Although the 3 of us won't be back here until the verdict, you can catch me every day on E! News, where I will bring you the latest updates during the deliberations. I can do it. Sean and Howard, see you back here for the jury verdict.